Welcome back to Last Moments. Join me as I uncover the cases of the amusement park accidents that ended in tragedy. From a Karen who talked her way too close to a tiger enclosure, to a drunk college student climbing over a log flume during the steepest drop in the dumbest way possible. It was July 20th, 2016, and the South Carolina coast was sitting under the kind of heat that makes everything feel slightly unreal. It was a busy summer, the kind of day where families pack into attractions shoulder to shoulder, and the noise never really stops. Malia Vesta was 38 and worked in retail sales, though she treated staff everywhere like they were beneath her. She complained over minor inconveniences, interrupted employees constantly, and acted like every rule was a personal attack. She arrived at the park with her sister and nephew, already acting like she knew the place better than the employees did. The tiger encounter was the whole reason she made the trip. She had seen clips online, guests crouching beside cubs getting close-up reactions, and she had already decided that she was going to get that shot, whatever it took. I get why she wanted that video. We all chase that one photo or clip that feels worth our trip, but sometimes chasing the perfect shot makes you forget what you're really stepping into. The safari section was a small walk-through annex attached to the main park. A fenced area with a cub interaction pen, a juvenile holding lane, and a narrow corridor used to move older cats between enclosures. Before entry, staff gave a mandatory safety briefing. Malia interrupted it twice. The first time to ask why the rules were so strict if the animals were supposedly trained. The second time to tell her sister, loudly enough for the whole group to hear. Tucked inside Malia's jacket pocket the entire time was an open strip of beef jerky she had carried in deliberately. Inside the enclosure, she filmed non-stop, mocking safety barriers and staff. When a juvenile tiger began pacing near her fence, drawn by the scent in her pocket, Malia took it as attention. She waved her sleeve to hold it there and leaned over the divider, pushing her phone closer to the chain link. An employee told her to step back from the divider, but Malia just rolled her eyes, called him dramatic, and kept filming herself complaining about the staff while hanging over the fence. With her phone held overhead and her torso fully draped across the divider, she reached her jacket pocket toward the fencing, the beef jerky now close enough that the tiger reacted without hesitation. The animal lunged upward and slammed hard into the chain link. The force, combined with Malia's weight pressing down on the divider, shifted the upper support bar several inches out of alignment, briefly widening one of the chain link diamonds near the top edge into a larger gap. She lost her balance completely and fell backward. In that split second, with her upper body still close to the fence and the gap forced open by the impact, the tiger was able to push its snout partially through the distorted opening, clamping onto the side of her neck and shoulder before the fencing snapped back. Witnesses described violent impacts against the barrier as the animal pulled and shook her upper body against it. Her sister screamed and pulled her nephew away immediately, turning him so he wouldn't see the worst of it, while staff rushed in to clear the area. Employees struck the fence with poles, and the tiger was eventually forced back into the holding lane and secured. If only Malia had listened. If only she hadn't brought that beef jerky into the enclosure, maybe we'd see her today as a successful content creator. Emergency responders confirmed Malia died at the scene. The official cause of death was catastrophic neck trauma, airway destruction, and massive blood loss. Her sister and nephew were treated on site for shock and later gave statements to investigators before leaving the park that evening. The tiger was not euthanized. The attraction closed temporarily, while the fencing and divider systems were fully rebuilt and reinforced. It was May 27, 2016, at a large commercial amusement complex in Shenzhen, China, where a drop tower stood roughly 130 feet above a concrete service plaza, and by mid-afternoon, one of its carriages had already completed several full cycles without incident, until the last one. Kale Tong was 23 years old and worked as a graphic designer at a mid-sized branding agency in Shenzhen. Apparently, his portfolio was strong enough that his supervisor had recommended him for a senior role the previous month. Friends described him as someone who was always moving. Weekends were spent rock climbing, urban hiking, or capturing footage from elevated vantage points across the city. He had built a modest following on a domestic short video platform, almost entirely from content filmed in high places. He visited the complex that afternoon with 3 co-workers as part of an informal team outing. Drop towers of this class accelerate riders downward at speeds approaching 55 miles per hour. The over-the-shoulder restraint system is engineered to hold each occupant at a fixed torso position against a rigid seat back. The geometry matters because the harness distributes deceleration force across the chest and lap simultaneously. Investigations later showed that Cale had pushed upward aggressively against his restraint, shifting his torso slightly forward and creating partial separation from the seat back. A standing or partially upright occupant removes that distribution entirely. The carriage held 8 riders that cycle. Cale was positioned in an outer-facing seat on the upper ring. Footage recovered from a bystander's phone, filmed from the plaza below, captured the 30 seconds before the drop initiated. The footage captured the carriage from the plaza below, showing Cale shifting upward against the restraint and other riders' reactions, though his exact upper body motion is partially obscured by the carriage frame. Other riders on the carriage were visibly and audibly reacting. A staff member at the base noticed the movement and attempted to halt the ride via emergency stop, but the carriage had already entered the pre-release sequence, leaving no time to intervene. The drop initiated. I think about the window between the moment that staff member reached the panel and the moment the ride released, and I genuinely don't know how anyone who watched that footage walks away without it changing them. The bystander footage shows Cale's body, shifted forward and partially separated from the seat back, thrown against the interior rail of the carriage within the first 2 seconds of descent. The impact with the rail was not glancing. His left arm and shoulder struck the restraint and seat structure at full downward acceleration, and the momentum carried his upper body forward while his lower body remained partially seated. The total descent from 130 feet at those speeds takes under 3 seconds. What the footage captures in that window is not dramatic in any cinematic sense. It is mechanical, brief, and completely without corrective motion. The force of the descent continued to drive his body against the restraint and inner frame of the carriage, with no recovery of position before the ride reached the lower section. He did not reach the concrete service platform below. Witnesses at the base described a sound that several of them initially mistook for a mechanical malfunction, a single dense impact, before they processed what they were seeing. Bystanders called emergency services immediately. EMS arrived in 7 minutes, but he did not survive. Cause of death was listed as multi-system traumatic injury, consistent with high-velocity impact against a rigid structure during free-fall descent. The ride was closed for investigation. Staff at the facility completed additional safety protocol training in the weeks that followed, with revised procedures for pre-launch restraint verification put in place. I've read a lot of these incidents, and what is disturbing to me here isn't the decision itself. It's that 8 people were strapped into that carriage and had no way to stop what was about to happen to everyone around them. That part doesn't leave you easily. It was the 3rd of October, 2015 in Orlando. An amusement park's aging dark ride had been converted for a single overnight event. It has been running since the late 1990s, older than any of the guests who had been invited to film inside it. Adrian Vale was 27 years old, restless and determined, a YouTube horror creator who had spent years building a channel. And lately, it had been slipping, the views falling, the collaborations drying up, and Adrian had been feeling the anxiety of someone watching something they built begin to quietly come apart. His girlfriend, Maya, knew better than anyone how little he had been sleeping, how tightly he was holding on to the idea that the right upload could turn everything around. And when a limited overnight invitation arrived from the amusement park for the even, with a private word from a park representative that strong coverage could lead to a full sponsorship partnership, Adrian told his friends this was the kind of opportunity that changed everything, and he meant it completely. I noticed Adrian was invited. He had a representative who had spoken to him directly about a partnership. He did not sneak in. He walked through a door someone opened for him. Just after 1 a.m., the invited creators moved into the attraction in small groups, carrying flashlights and radio communicators. The event was built around puzzle sequences and staged blackouts and fake emergency announcements designed to blur the line between real and theatrical, which is exactly what made everything that followed so hard to untangle. During the second puzzle sequence, an actual power fault hit the system. Strobes fired spread unevenly. Audio looped in some sections while others went silent. Ride vehicles stopped mid-track while fog kept pouring in, and everyone inside, staff included, assumed for too long that it was part of the show. If the staff, the very people who were supposed to know the difference between the show and a real fault, could not tell either, I genuinely do not know how Adrian was supposed to. Adrian separated from his group while continuing to film, telling the others that real backstage footage would make for stronger content. He found a service access door hidden behind a themed wall panel and went through it, stepping into a maintenance corridor where technicians access the track systems and vehicle transfer equipment beneath the ride. At 23 minutes past 1, engineers in the control room began a partial reboot, believing all guests remained inside approved areas, and portions of the transfer system came back online in the dark, and Adrian's chest-mounted camera captured a sudden flash of metallic movement before the signal cut out entirely. Staff assumed for nearly 18 minutes that he had simply wandered off for better footage. Concerns only escalated when radio calls went unanswered and livestream viewers began asking why the feed had gone dead. Emergency responders located him inside the transfer bay shortly before 1:45 a.m. and pronounced him dead at the scene from fatal crush injuries sustained during unexpected transfer system movement. 18 minutes. Livestream viewers noticed before the staff did. I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because it is the detail that tells you most clearly how badly the accountability failed that night. The investigation found failures in how guests were tracked and monitored, how poorly the themed areas were separated from active machinery, and in how event staff and ride operators communicated with each other. The park closed permanently less than a month later, pending operational review and legal investigation. It was August 7th, 2016. A day meant for family fun turned into an unimaginable tragedy at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City. The Schwab family, residents of Kansas, had visited the park for elected official day, when public officials and their families were granted free admission. Michelle and Scott Schwab, along with their 4 sons, were excited to spend the day enjoying the water rides, but it was their 10-year-old son, Caleb, who was the most eager. Little did they know that this day would end in a devastating loss. Caleb, the second of the Schwab's 4 children, had always been full of energy and curiosity. His parents, especially his father, Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab, were eager to give their children a memorable summer day. Caleb, with his older brother Nathan, set his sights on the park's most thrilling attraction, the Verricht water slide. Towering at 168 feet, Verricht held the title of the world's tallest water slide, a feat of engineering that had captivated thrill seekers since its opening. The ride had no age restrictions, and Caleb, at just 10 years old, was allowed to ride despite his small stature. He and Nathan climbed the 264 steps to the top of Verricht, joining the line of eager riders. Caleb, weighing only 73 pounds, took the front seat of a 3-person raft with 2 women seated behind him. Nathan had already completed the ride and waited for his younger brother at the bottom, unaware that a tragedy was about to unfold. As Caleb's raft descended the slide, everything seemed normal until the raft went airborne over the second hill. The weight distribution, combined with the ride's high speed, caused the raft to lift off the slide surface. Caleb was forcefully thrown into the safety netting, where he struck a metal pole. The impact was fatal. He suffered catastrophic injuries on the spot. Witnesses below watched in horror as the raft, along with Caleb's lifeless body, completed its descent. Nathan, just 12 years old, saw the horrifying accident unfold in front of him. He screamed in terror, his voice rising above the chaos. He flew from the Verrucht. He flew from the Verrucht. Their mother, Michelle, rushed to reach Caleb, but bystanders held her back, fearing the devastating sight would be too much for her to bear. There was a gentleman who wouldn't allow me to come close enough to see what was going on, Michelle later recalled. He just kept saying, "Trust me, you don't want to go any further." Meanwhile, Scott Schwab repeatedly asked in disbelief if his son was truly dead, grappling with the sudden and overwhelming loss. The aftermath of Caleb's death plunged the family into grief and disbelief. In the days that followed, an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the incident revealed shocking safety failures. Verrucht, although a marvel to onlookers, had been plagued with safety concerns long before Caleb's tragic ride. The slide's design and construction were carried out by individuals without any formal engineering expertise. Instead, they relied on trial and error methods, a dangerous gamble for a ride of such magnitude. Further investigation revealed that Caleb's light weight in the front of the raft contributed to the disaster, as it created an imbalance. This wasn't the first time that Raft B, the specific raft Caleb rode in, had gone airborne. In fact, it had a history of speeding abnormally fast and lifting off the slide, but no significant changes were made to correct the issue. Even more concerning was the improper use of Velcro seatbelts, which had reportedly come undone on previous rides. This lack of basic safety precautions contributed directly to Caleb's death. In 2017, the Schwab family settled with Schlitterbahn and other involved parties for approximately $20 million. The Verricht slide was dismantled, and Schlitterbahn, Kansas City closed permanently in 2018. Caleb's death was not merely a freak accident, but a preventable tragedy caused by negligence and safety failures, forever marking a day that should have been filled with laughter and joy. It was September 9th, 2017, at a regional amusement park outside Bengaluru, India, where a company outing packed the grounds as heat lingered and high-intensity rides dispatched full seats non-stop. Rohit Malhotra, 29, worked in mobile phone retail in Bengaluru, handling warranty issues and customer complaints through long, crowded shifts. He lived at home, helped with expenses, and set aside small savings for a future business course. His heavier build often made restraint checks difficult on high-intensity rides, something he had encountered before but usually laughed off. During a company outing to the park, Rohit decided he wanted to ride one of the thrill attractions. When he was seated on the pendulum ride, the restraint indicator stayed red, signaling an improper fit due to load limits. The operator told him to exit. With co-workers watching and the ride moments from dispatch, Rohit argued to try again, unwilling to step away and be singled out. After stepping back into the seat, Rohit adjusted himself repeatedly. Surveillance footage later showed him forcing the shoulder restraint down hard until it clicked once. The harness appeared secure, but it had only partially engaged and was not fully locked into position. The operator performed a visual check, saw the green indicator and the harness sitting down on his shoulders, and cleared the seat for dispatch. Rohit settled back into the seat as the cycle began. The ride launched immediately. It was one of the park's most aggressive attractions, swinging riders more than 100 feet while inverting them repeatedly. The restraint system depended on precise sensor calibration and full locking engagement. Because Rohit had forced the harness into a false partial lock rather than achieving a proper fit, the restraint was not fully engaged. It sat high on his shoulders, leaving excess vertical space. As the pendulum gained speed, centrifugal force lifted Rohit's body upward. On the first full rise, the restraint shifted instead of holding firm. His hips lifted above the seat edge. When the ride inverted, gravity pulled his upper body through the gap beneath the harness. By the peak of the swing, his legs cleared the seat entirely, and he slipped free. Rohit was ejected feet first, then rotated backward by the momentum of the arm. He struck a fixed steel maintenance stair platform positioned beneath the ride's swing path. His head hit the metal edge at speed, producing a sharp impact heard across the ride area. His body fell to the concrete below and remained motionless. Blood spread quickly beneath his head and along the base of the stairs. The ride continued its programmed cycle for roughly 40 seconds, gradually slowing rather than stopping abruptly. Riders screamed as they passed overhead, clearly seeing Rohit's body below. Staff activated the emergency stop, which reduced power but did not halt the ride instantly, consistent with pendulum ride design. Security pushed back onlookers and sealed the area. Medical staff reached Rohit within minutes. He was unresponsive, with visible skull fractures and massive bleeding. There was no pulse or breathing. Paramedics arrived approximately 7 minutes later and pronounced him dead at the scene. The post-mortem listed catastrophic blunt force head trauma as the cause of death. The skull fractures caused immediate brain failure, making survival impossible. No alcohol or drugs were present. The restraint showed incomplete locking. Video evidence confirmed deliberate forcing of the restraint into a partial lock before dispatch. Investigators cited unsafe rider interference with the restraint system as the primary factor. Rohit's parents later filed a civil case against the park. It was July 18, 2016. The afternoon sun beat down on a major water park outside Toronto, Ontario. Thomas Reynolds, a 32-year-old construction manager, sat in a 6-person raft approaching the ride's most turbulent section. Thomas had spent 8 years managing residential construction projects across the Greater Toronto Area. Colleagues described him as hands-on and practical, the type who'd climb scaffolding himself rather than wait for workers. He was a strong swimmer who'd grown up on Lake Ontario, comfortable in water most people would avoid. Thomas had developed an unusual hobby over the past year, scavenging debris from rivers and waterways. His garage contained fishing lures, sunglasses, even a GoPro camera he'd retrieved from various bodies of water. He'd mentioned to friends about wanting to check what accumulated in water park ride systems. Convinced valuable items ended up trapped in intake grates and flow diverters. Rapids rides operate by channeling thousands of gallons through concrete troughs fitted with jets and obstacles, creating turbulent currents that move circular rafts through the course at speeds reaching 15 miles per hour. That afternoon, witnesses said that Thomas had ridden the rapids 3 times already with his girlfriend, studying the water flow and debris accumulation points. On his 4th ride, he told her that he spotted something floating near one of the steel support brackets where the protective padding had deteriorated over time, leaving a hard steel flange intermittently exposed during high water flow, what appeared to be a waterproof phone case bobbing in the current. Despite his girlfriend's protests, Thomas leaned over the raft's edge as they approached the rapids section, reaching toward the debris. Park staff operating the ride exit noticed immediately, activating their radio to alert control operators. The radio call was garbled by the ride's pump alarms. Other riders in his raft attempted to warn him, but Thomas stretched further, his torso now completely over the side. The raft hit the first rapid at full speed, tilting sharply right. Thomas lost his grip, pitching headfirst into the churning water. The current was far more powerful than he anticipated, instantly sweeping him toward the concrete channel wall. Before he could orient himself, the water drove him directly into the exposed steel flange, striking him with catastrophic force. Thomas's head struck the beam, and his body went limp as the current carried him approximately 30 feet downstream. The water around him darkened as he drifted downstream. Riders downstream screamed as Thomas's unconscious body floated past their rafts. Park staff hit the emergency shutdown within 20 seconds, but the water volume kept the current moving, so full stoppage took nearly 90 seconds. 2 lifeguards immediately initiated emergency procedures, throwing rescue ropes, and when it became clear the raft could not be retrieved in time, both entered the water to pull Thomas from the ride's exit pool. He had sustained a severe head injury. The first lifeguard began CPR while the second called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, finding Thomas unresponsive with no pulse. Despite advanced life support, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report identified fatal head injuries caused by blunt force trauma. Drowning was ruled out as the primary cause. Thomas had died from the impact itself. The waterproof case Thomas had reached for was recovered from near the intake grate, containing a broken smartphone. A subsequent investigation determined the ride had been operating as designed, and that the fatal injuries resulted from rider misconduct. No mechanical failures were identified, and the case was closed following inspection. It was June 23, 2016, and Boardwalk Adventure Pier in Galveston, Texas was running at the kind of pace that only a packed summer festival weekend produces. The Gulf air was thick and humid, the smell of fried food and salt water cutting through everything, the midway noise constant, ride mechanisms, crowd chatter, music bleeding from every direction. Kyla Penn was 36 years old. She worked in medical billing and had built a personality around navigating systems to get the outcome she wanted. Precise and impatient, she treated service staff like obstacles instead of people. By the time her group reached the spinning dark ride, she had already spent the afternoon loudly complaining about the wait times. The ride exited into a shared snack and control platform, a restricted area with dispatch controls, refrigeration, soft serve machines, electrical cabinets, and emergency stop systems. Employees-only signs marked the side entrance, and a gate clearly separated it from the public, a boundary every other guest respected. Kyla looked at the line in front of the public counter, looked at the side gate, and pushed through it. She moved through the restricted area with the kind of confidence that comes from facing no real consequences for a long time. Staff initially assumed she was connected to maintenance because she entered without hesitation. When a worker realized she was a guest and told her directly to return to the public side, Kyla told him the line was unreasonable, that the service was too slow, and that she was getting what she had already paid for. She turned back toward the counter and reached across the service area toward a display on the far side. It's one of those moments where I just shake my head. Every time I run into something like this, someone cutting a line, it's not just about impatience. It's about acting like the rules don't matter. Witnesses on the public side had already noticed her inside the restricted area and heard the exchange. Several had taken out their phones. As Kyla pulled backward from the counter, her sleeve caught the drip tray beneath a mounted soft-serve machine. The tray shifted and clattered loudly. She stepped back sharply. Her heel caught the edge of a floor mat that had shifted during the busy rush, and she lost her balance completely. The back of her skull struck the concrete floor, a single, immediate impact with the full weight of her body behind it. Emergency crews documented catastrophic blunt force head trauma and cervical injuries from the backward impact onto concrete. Witnesses reported Kyla briefly gasping before losing consciousness. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at a nearby trauma center. Security footage captured everything: Kyla bypassing the marked gate, the confrontation, the sleeve catching the drip tray, and the fall. Employees confirmed she had ignored direct instructions to leave. My takeaway for this story is simple: boundaries matter. Whether it's a gate at an amusement park or a line at a counter, those limits are there to protect you as much as they protect the system. The snack and ride control area was temporarily shut down for investigation, with the pier adding stricter gate controls and staff enforcement in the weeks that followed. It was January 19, 2018, at an outdoor amusement complex near a commercial strip in Bangkok, Thailand, on a Saturday afternoon when the temperature sat at 91 degrees and the midway was thick with families moving between attractions. Marisa Lay was 42 years old and worked as a senior procurement officer at a mid-sized logistics firm based in Singapore. She had traveled to Bangkok alone on a 3-day trip, her third visit to the city in 2 years. People who worked alongside her described her as effective but chronically difficult. Former colleagues told investigators she had a consistent pattern of escalating disputes with vendors, security personnel, and service workers when a decision didn't go her way. Based on interviews, I got the sense that she was critical to a fault, and she had a long track record of getting what she wanted by refusing to accept no. At the attraction that afternoon, an operator informed Marisa she exceeded the posted weight limit of 220 pounds. She weighed 231 pounds according to the medical examiner's report. 2 families with children were standing nearby. Staff attempted to redirect her to a different attraction. She held her position at the gate for approximately 3 minutes, loudly refusing to leave before a second operator arrived. Neither staff member physically blocked the gate opening. That detail matters. As the argument stalled, the ride continued cycling behind her. Gondola cars sweeping around the central axis at full speed, cutting a wide arc just inside the perimeter fence. Each pass came fast and low, close enough that the air shifted with it. The fence marked the limit for a reason. The gate beside her was supposed to stay locked while the ride was in motion. Marisa reached for it anyway. The latch resisted the first time, then again, before lifting free on the second attempt, the loosened spring giving way under pressure. She stepped through and moved a few feet inside. A gondola car came around at full operational speed and struck her on the left side, the force from the several hundred-pound car transferring instantly on impact and throwing her laterally into an inner fence post. She did not fall immediately. Witnesses described her remaining partially upright against the post for 1 to 2 seconds as another arm completed its rotation and swept back through. It caught her lower body and pinned her briefly against the post as nearby staff rushed to hit the emergency stop. The emergency stop triggered almost immediately, but the ride carried through a short coasting distance before halting completely. From the moment she stepped inside to the moment the gondolas stopped moving, it lasted only a few seconds. I've gone over this sequence more than once. It's so obvious but also crazy to me that 4 seconds is more than enough time for this kind of damage to become unsurvivable. Staff on site called emergency services immediately following the second impact. Marissa was unresponsive when paramedics reached her and was pronounced dead. The medical examiner documented blunt thoracic trauma with multiple rib fractures, traumatic splenic rupture, bilateral pelvic fractures, and crush injuries to the left femur consistent with high-force mechanical compression. The cause of death was hemorrhagic shock, secondary to internal injuries. The ride was closed for the remainder of the day. Local authorities investigated and issued minor citations to the operating company related to gate barrier standards. No criminal charges were filed. The citations were resolved administratively within 2 months. Every layer of this, the posted weight limit, the unlocked gate, the moving ride, even her history of pushing past resistance, lined up in a way that left almost no margin for error once she made that final decision. The staff should have had a fully secured barrier, no question, but at the same time, stepping into an active ride envelope is one of those actions where the consequence is immediate and unforgiving. It was the 14th of July, 2017 in Orlando, Florida. Thousands of guests had gathered at a park for the summer finale, music playing across the grounds. Children lined up the barriers, waiting for the fireworks launch. Andrew George was 26 years old and lived alone in a rented apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, a city he had chosen not for any particular reason, but because the rent was manageable and the location put him within driving distance of a dozen major attractions worth filming. He had been running his channel for just over 5 years, building it slowly from a few hundred views per upload to a following of nearly 90,000 subscribers, all of them drawn in by the same kind of content. Restricted areas, staff-only corridors, behind-the-scenes angles at theme parks and entertainment venues that the public was never supposed to see. His videos were calm and unhurried, filmed in a low, quiet style that made each restricted space feel like a secret being shared directly with the viewer. And that intimacy was exactly what kept people coming back. The park had been on his list for months, specifically because of its summer finale fireworks show, which he believed would give him the kind of close ignition line footage that no one in his space had ever captured, something that would push him past the 100,000 subscriber mark he had been chasing for the better part of a year. He already had 90,000 subscribers. I mention that not to diminish him, but because I think it matters. He was not chasing millions. He was chasing 100,000, and he had been chasing it for years, and I think that patience and that hunger are both visible in what happened next. He arrived at the park that evening with a single camera and a plan he had thought about long enough to feel confident in. Staff called out to him as he moved deeper into the restricted area. Warning signs lined the walls in bold red lettering, and the lighting changed from the warm glow of the public zones to the flat, cold flicker of a service corridor that was never meant to be seen on camera. Staff called out to him. Signs lined the walls, even the lighting itself changed. I have covered a lot of these stories, and I cannot think of one where the environment did more to communicate danger. He walked through every single signal it gave him. He kept moving, kept narrating, kept the lens pointed forward, telling his audience he was about to show them something incredible. What he did not know was that a launch array 30 feet ahead had already been armed and was cycling through its automated pre-show diagnostic sequence, a routine test that, once initiated at the module level, would continue through its firing phase regardless of what was happening in the corridor around it. The sequence completed, and the array discharged. The live stream cut to black. Security teams reached him within minutes, pulling him from the restricted zone and calling for emergency medical support. But the damage done by the heat and the pressure and the gases in that enclosed corridor was not the kind that paramedics could reverse, and he went into cardiac arrest before he ever reached the medical station. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical examiner recorded the cause of death as thermal trauma and inhalation injury from close-range pyrotechnic exposure, with delayed evacuation from the corridor cited as a contributing factor. The investigation found no mechanical fault, no accidental misfire, only a man who had walked into the wrong place at the wrong time, and an automated system that had no way of knowing he was there. The park expanded its exclusion zones, reinforced its barriers, and introduced real-time access tracking across all restricted areas. The footage never published, the incredible shot he promised his audience never came, and and the only record left was a dark screen and the sound of the feed going silent. It was June 27, 1999. It was a warm summer day at Paramount's Great America theme park in Santa Clara, California. 7-year-old Danielle Gentile was enjoying a day of fun with her family, excited to experience the thrilling water attractions that the park had to offer. Little did anyone know that this ordinary family outing would end in an unimaginable tragedy that would forever change pool safety regulations across America. Danielle, a vibrant and energetic second grader from Millbrae, California, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. With her bright smile and playful spirit, she eagerly made her way through the park with her parents and siblings, eventually arriving at the Whirlwind Rapids water attraction in the park's splash zone area. The Whirlwind Rapids was a circular water ride where guests would sit in inner tubes and spin around a large pool before being funneled into a catch pool at the bottom. It was a popular attraction, especially on hot summer days, and the line was filled with excited children and their families. When it was finally Danielle's turn, she climbed into her inner tube and began the thrilling descent. She laughed as she spun through the rapids, the cool water providing relief from the summer heat. But as she reached the catch pool at the bottom of the ride, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses reported seeing Danielle's inner tube flip over as she entered the catch pool. In an instant, the young girl was submerged underwater. What happened next would haunt her family and other park goers for years to come. Beneath the surface of the catch pool was a powerful suction drain with a missing safety cover. As Danielle struggled underwater, her arm was suddenly caught in this uncovered drain. The suction force, estimated at hundreds of pounds of pressure, made it impossible for the 50-pound child to free herself. Parkgoers quickly noticed the overturned inner tube and alerted nearby lifeguards. A frantic rescue attempt began as staff and bystanders tried desperately to pull Danielle free from the powerful suction. Despite their efforts, they couldn't break the vacuum seal created by the drain. It took nearly 5 minutes before maintenance workers could shut down the pump system. By then, Danielle had been underwater far too long. Emergency responders performed CPR and rushed her to a nearby hospital, but the damage was irreversible. Danielle Gentile was pronounced dead from drowning. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing negligence. The 12-inch drain had been operating without its required safety cover, creating a deadly suction trap. Park maintenance records showed that the cover had been removed during routine cleaning and never properly replaced. Even more disturbing, no secondary anti-entrapment systems were in place, a basic safety feature that could have prevented this tragedy. Danielle's death sent shockwaves through the amusement park industry and led to significant changes in water attraction safety. Her parents, devastated by their loss, channeled their grief into advocacy. Their efforts, along with similar tragic cases, eventually contributed to the passage of the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act in 2007, which mandated anti-entrapment drain covers and other safety measures in public pools and spas across the United States. Today, Danielle's story serves as a sobering reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in water attractions. What began as a carefree summer day ended in an unthinkable tragedy, one that could have been prevented with proper safety protocols and maintenance. Her legacy lives on in the improved safety standards that now protect countless children from suffering a similar fate. It was July 14, 2014, at a local water park in San Antonio, Texas. The afternoon heat pushed crowds toward water rides, where shouting, rushing water, and constant motion blended. The River Rapids attraction was known for soaking riders, not flipping rafts or trapping bodies beneath the current. Alyssa Moreno was 20, a community college student in Laredo finishing nursing prerequisites while working weekends at a daycare to cover books and fees. Friends knew her as quiet and easygoing, rarely seeking attention. That July trip was her first vacation without family, squeezed between extra shifts and a tight budget, leaving everyone tired, sunburned, and filming casually. By early afternoon, they lined up for the Rapids ride. It was a basic circular raft attraction, 6 molded seats, individual lap restraints, and water churning through concrete channels. Signs at the entrance warned riders to stay seated, keep restraints fastened, and distribute weight evenly. The operator slowed the loading process and pointed out that 3 riders were sitting on one side. He asked them to spread out properly and reminded them to keep their restraints fastened. They shifted slightly, still uneven, joked about it, and waved him off. A bystander near the railing recorded them as the raft drifted away from the platform. The raft entered the channel, spinning through shallow drops. It bumped and splashed like normal. Water flow was running at a higher setting typical for peak summer crowds, making the raft move faster through wider sections. As the ride slowed near a bend, Alyssa deliberately unbuckled her lap restraint. Ignoring the posted warnings, she stood halfway up from her seat so everyone could fit into a group selfie. One of the riders reached toward her, but she laughed and steadied herself with one hand on the raft rim. The other hand held a phone. The channel ahead widened into a straight stretch where currents crossed. The raft rotated sideways and hesitated. Other riders later said it looked wrong, like it stalled instead of spinning. The current caught the raft broadside. It snapped hard toward the outer wall and flipped without warning. All 6 riders were thrown into the water when the raft overturned. 3 surfaced right away, coughing and grabbing the concrete edge. 2 others broke free moments later and pulled themselves toward the side. Alyssa did not come back up. The raft settled low in the channel, held down by the force of the moving water, its underside pressed flat against the floor. Investigators found the raft turned sideways and lodged in a widened channel, where uneven water pressure built beneath it. High flow, uneven weight, and a disengaged lap restraint caused it to flip and stay pinned. Witnesses saw Alyssa's arms stop moving first. Operators cut power, but the water pressure eased seconds too late. Alyssa surfaced unresponsive. Lifeguards pulled them out and called for help. Paramedics arrived in about 7 minutes, attempted CPR, and continued resuscitation during transport. Alyssa was pronounced dead shortly after reaching the hospital. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning. Her lungs were filled with water. Bruising across her chest and shoulders showed sustained pressure, consistent with being pinned underwater. There were no fatal head injuries or internal damage. Loss of consciousness was attributed to oxygen deprivation. The death was ruled accidental. The ride was shut down and modified weeks later. Alyssa's daycare closed for a day so co-workers could attend her funeral. Her nursing books were donated to a local scholarship fund. It was August 3, 2014. The California afternoon sun beat down on a packed regional theme park, where the screams of thrill-seekers mixed with carnival music. Ethan Marks, a 16-year-old from Anaheim, stood at the base of the Titan drop coaster, eyeing the 180-foot vertical climb. What should have been an ordinary summer day would end with paramedics arriving to a scene of catastrophic trauma. Ethan wasn't a troubled kid. He maintained a 3.8 GPA at his high school and volunteered at a local animal shelter. But he was obsessed with building his social media following. He'd gained a few hundred followers by photographing himself dangling from freeway overpasses and balanced on building ledges. His parents said that they knew about the account, but dismissed it as typical teenage attention-seeking. Theme park safety relies on multiple layers of protection, including restraint harnesses engineered to withstand extreme forces, surveillance cameras, and physical barriers designed to keep guests away from ride structures. Warning signs plastered every surface near restricted areas, clearly stating that climbing on rides resulted in immediate ejection and criminal trespassing charges. His friends said that he'd scouted the coaster for weeks, noticing that during loading sequences, cars sometimes remained paused at the apex, creating what he believed was enough time for a photo. That afternoon, Ethan separated from his friends, approaching the ride's exit pathway, where metal fencing created a barrier between guests and the ride's structural supports. 2 staff members were managing the loading platform 200 feet away. Ethan scaled the 6-foot chain-link fence, his phone clutched in one hand. He'd waited until a gate to a service pathway sat momentarily ajar, allowing him to bypass the normal barriers. 3 witnesses later reported seeing him climb the steel lattice framework supporting the track, moving with alarming speed toward the paused coaster car at the summit. A control room attendant glimpsed the climb on a camera feed and radioed the operator, who engaged the ride's emergency stop. The train remained locked at a block break at the apex. There was no safe, rapid procedure to retrieve someone hanging outside the restraints. Staff attempted to alert him from below, but the distance and ambient noise made communication ineffective. Ethan's friends watched from a distance, seeing him on the structure as he reached the coaster car side, approximately 180 feet above concrete maintenance pits. Positioning himself on the narrow maintenance catwalk beside the frozen coaster, Ethan leaned beyond the guardrail to frame the selfie. His sneaker lost traction on the narrow metal surface of the catwalk. His body twisted sideways, phone clattering away as both hands grasped for the railing. He caught it briefly, but momentum carried him backward. He fell from the structure before striking lower support beams. His body struck a horizontal steel crossbeam approximately 60 feet below. His body cartwheeled, striking 2 more support structures before landing face down in a maintenance pit containing hydraulic equipment. A ride operator called emergency services, and paramedics arrived within minutes but only pronounced Ethan dead at the scene. The county coroner listed cause of death as blunt force trauma due to a high-energy fall, with severe head trauma and fatal spinal injuries. Ethan's funeral drew attendees that included classmates who were with him at the park. The park permanently installed 12-foot fencing and increased security patrols. A subsequent investigation determined the ride had been functioning normally and that the death resulted from unauthorized access to restricted infrastructure. No mechanical faults were identified, and the case was closed as a fatal trespassing incident. It was May 1st, 2018, and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee was deep into spring festival season. The theme park sat against the edge of the Smoky Mountain foothills, the midway busy, the smell of kettle corn drifting through the afternoon air, families moving between rides in every direction. Brenna Whitlock was 34 years old. She worked at a boutique clothing shop, and if you've ever met someone who treats their personal aesthetic like a moral position, you already have a sense of who Brenna was. She had strong opinions about what people wore, stronger opinions about anyone who tried to tell her what she couldn't wear, and a habit of turning minor inconveniences into public confrontations. She arrived that day in a flowing maxi dress extending well past her calves, a garment she had almost certainly chosen deliberately, because Brenna was the type who treated dress codes as discrimination, and said so whenever one applied to her. She had come to the park to celebrate a recent promotion at work, a milestone she framed as proof that staying unapologetically herself always paid off. I guess girls will always be girls. Sometimes it's the clothes that light them up. There's just something about the right outfit that makes them feel seen, confident, and a little untouchable. The spinning pendulum was one of the park's standout rides, a massive gondola that whipped riders outward while swinging in a broad arc above the concrete midway, climbing nearly 40 feet at its peak. Safety rules were impossible to miss, posted at the queue, repeated at the loading platform, and reinforced verbally before every cycle. When an attendant stopped Brenna at the queue entrance, she told him the rule was discriminatory against women who chose not to wear pants. He explained the mechanical reason. She told him the explanation was only an excuse. She put the poncho on, she walked through the gate, she sat down inside the restraint, and the moment the attendant's back was turned, she worked the poncho off and tucked the loose sections of her dress beneath her legs, just enough to pass a glance, not enough to actually secure the fabric against the mechanics of a high-speed spinning ride. Nearby riders noticed loose material hanging below the edge of her seat. Nobody flagged it in time. Midway through a rapid rotation, a strip of her dress slipped into a narrow gap between the seat and the restraint arm, a pinch point where moving metal met. As the gondola reversed, the fabric fed deeper, catching on a bolt and anchoring to the ride. When the pendulum swung back, her body moved, but the trapped fabric didn't. The dress tightened across her lap, pulling against the harness. The opposing forces twisted her pelvis while her upper body stayed pinned, torquing her spine instead of just throwing her sideways. As the ride slowed, the tension never released. Each swing yanked her lower body toward the anchor point, slamming her leg into a divider and her torso into the restraint. What started as a snag became sustained spinal torque. Riders screamed for operators to stop, An emergency stop was triggered, but the pendulum needed several swings to slow, each worsening it. Fire crews cut away sections of fabric before removing her from the platform. She lost consciousness during transport and was pronounced dead later that evening. Investigators confirmed severe pelvic fractures, spinal trauma, and internal bleeding consistent with prolonged torsional force, combined with repeated side impact loading during the slowdown phase, rather than a single sudden break. The ride was shut down immediately following the incident and remained closed through the investigation. What I learned from Brenna's story is how pride can sometimes blind us to practical realities. Brenna believed she was standing up against unfair rules, but in the process, she overlooked the reason those rules existed. It was June 14, 2015, at a traveling fairground on a packed dirt lot on the outskirts of Lahore, Pakistan, where generator exhaust mixed with food smoke and a Ferris wheel had been running since early afternoon. By evening, the crowd had filled every lane between the stalls, and the machine that would kill was still turning. Rehan Qureshi was 28 years old and worked as a junior IT consultant at a mid-sized firm in Lahore's commercial district. He had a reputation among his friend group for pushing situations further than called for, not out of aggression, but out of a consistent need to be the most watchable person in any setting. Former classmates described him as someone who turned ordinary moments into performances. However, I don't think he was reckless in a destructive sense. He was reckless the way people are when they've never been seriously hurt and can no longer imagine that they will be. That evening, he had come with 4 friends. The plan was simple: tickets, a ride to the top, photos from the peak. From the moment they boarded, Rehan was already working the crowd, waving at strangers below, rocking the cabin side to side, gripping the outer frame and actively climbing onto the edge of the cabin floor, putting his torso over the restraint. Staff issued verbal warnings twice during the ascent. He acknowledged both with a grin and kept going. The Ferris wheel creaked as it turned, its open frame cabins hanging on pivot joints that allowed a slight, constant sway. Each movement fed into the next, small shifts in weight translating into real motion. Rehan had already climbed partway onto the side frame, testing how far he could lean. The low restraint bar pressed against his thighs, intact but never designed to hold someone who was actively trying to get past it. At that point, I believed the outcome wasn't unpredictable, just delayed. As the wheel neared its highest point, the structure gave a brief mechanical hesitation. The rotation slowed briefly as part of its normal cycle, and the cabin responded immediately, swinging outward a few inches. That was enough. With his weight already shifted, Rehan's center of gravity moved past the pivot point. The cabin swung within its limited arc, no more than a foot of total travel, but the motion carried him with it. His torso cleared the cabin edge. The rotating support arms and lateral bracing at that radius moved slowly, roughly 2 to 3 miles per hour relative to a stationary body. He was pinned and scraped along the nearest support arm, not struck repeatedly by multiple segments. Witnesses in adjacent cabins described a sudden crushing impact against a lateral brace, followed by him being wedged against the frame as the cabin continued its rotation, unfolding over several seconds. One leg remained caught against the cabin floor, the only reason his body didn't fall to the lot below. His head struck a single lateral cross brace during the wedging, and a fair employee at the control panel, who had been monitoring the ride, hit the emergency stop button. The wheel coasted several more seconds on rotational inertia before halting, leaving Rehan's cabin suspended approximately 40 feet above the ground. A bystander placed the emergency call, and paramedics could only declare death at the scene. The medical examiner documented blunt force trauma to the anterior thorax, fractures to the sternum and 4 left side ribs, traumatic brain injury consistent with high force contact against a rigid structure, and acute internal hemorrhaging in the thoracic cavity. The injuries were not survivable. His 4 friends left the fairground together that night without speaking to anyone. I've read through a lot of accounts like this one, and this isn't some unpredictable freak accident. It's what happens when someone keeps escalating until reality finally answers back. What makes this one stand out isn't the violence, it's how completely unnecessary it was. He didn't get unlucky, he just ran out of chances. It was on the 18th of September 2016, San Diego, California. A large coastal amusement park remained crowded into sunset hours as late summer tourism and seasonal promotional events pushed attendance near operational peak capacity. Evan Stones was 28 years old, and he had built a large online following. People who tuned in for the thrill of watching him climb where he wasn't supposed to climb, film where he wasn't supposed to film, and go where nobody else dared to go. He called it raw realism, and for a long time it worked, but the numbers had been slipping, and newer creators were pushing harder and taking bigger risks, and Evan felt the pressure growing with every upload that underperformed. So he planned one final shot for his new video, a sunset sequence from the top of the park's famous observation tower, 240 feet above the ground. No harness, no safety lines, nothing between him and the open sky. I keep coming back to that phrase, one final shot. I do not think he meant it the way it turned out. I think he meant it the way creators always mean it. One more video, one more win, one more reason for the audience to stay. What Evan didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, was that coastal wind advisories had been active all evening, with upper-level gusts swinging between 28 and 38 miles per hour around the tower's exposed exterior. He noticed something else instead, a maintenance access gate on the western side of the deck that hadn't latched properly after an earlier inspection, a small gap in the system, just wide enough for someone determined enough to use it. At 7:11 that evening, he launched his compact drone from inside the rotating viewing deck, then guided it through the unsecured gate and out into the open air, where the wind immediately threw it sideways. He tried again and again to stabilize the shot, but the crosswinds kept pushing the drone off course, the sunset slipping further away with every failed attempt. At 7:18, he stepped over the waist-high safety barrier and moved into the restricted maintenance corridor, ignoring the guests around him who called out warnings about the wind. The exterior catwalk was built for trained engineers wearing tethered harnesses clipped to fixed anchor points along the structure, and it had never been designed or rated for anyone else. Evan had none of that. He stood on the graded metal platform with a camera in one hand and a drone controller in the other, speaking into the lens about fighting the wind and chasing the perfect final shot, while the tower hummed and swayed around him in the gusts. At 7:24, a crosswind exceeding 46 miles per hour struck the western face of the tower, throwing him sideways into the railing, knocking the camera from his grip and splitting his attention between his footing and the drifting drone above him. Seconds later, another gust hit, and with his weight already off balance, his body shifted over the low maintenance rail, and he fell. Paramedics reached him within minutes, but his injuries were catastrophic, and he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the regional trauma center. His drone was found in the landscaping below, out of power, the footage inside it cutting off somewhere over the Pacific. The investigation found no fault with the tower, no mechanical failure, no structural defect, only a young man who crossed every barrier placed between him and the edge, chasing a video that was never finished. The camera recovered from the catwalk still held the last frames he captured, a sky full of color and a shot he never got. Following the incident, the park installed upgraded electronically monitored access locks, expanded upper tower surveillance coverage, and implemented automated control room alerts for unauthorized maintenance corridor entry. It was July 24, 1982. A sweltering summer day at Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey turned deadly for 15-year-old George Lopez. The teenager had come to the infamous amusement park with friends, looking forward to cooling off and enjoying the various water attractions. Instead, he would become the first victim of what employees would later grimly nickname the Grave Pool, Action Park's notoriously dangerous wave pool. Action Park had opened just 4 years earlier in 1978 and had quickly gained a reputation for its extreme attractions and lax safety standards. The park was the brainchild of Eugene Mulvihill, a businessman who believed in giving thrill seekers freedom, often at the expense of basic safety precautions. Among the park's many attractions was the Tidal Wave Pool, a 100-foot wide by 250-foot long pool that could hold up to 1,000 people at a time. Unlike typical wave pools, Action Park's version was particularly dangerous. The pool reached a depth of 8 feet and generated waves up to 3 feet high using powerful air-pressurized pumps. These weren't gentle, rolling swells, but powerful, chaotic surges that could easily overwhelm even strong swimmers. Adding to the danger, the pool's bottom was painted blue, making it difficult for lifeguards to spot swimmers in distress. That Saturday afternoon, the wave pool was operating at near capacity. Hundreds of visitors packed the water, creating a chaotic scene that made it nearly impossible for lifeguards to monitor everyone effectively. Despite the park's claim of having up to 12 lifeguards on duty, former employees would later reveal that many were undertrained and overwhelmed, sometimes performing as many as 30 rescues per day. As the powerful waves began churning the water, George found himself in the deeper section of the pool. Whether he ventured there intentionally or was pushed by the crowd remains unclear. What is known is that at some point George began to struggle. In the crowded, churning water, his distress went unnoticed by both lifeguards and fellow swimmers. By the time anyone realized George was missing, it was too late. Lifeguards eventually spotted him submerged in the deep end and pulled him from the water. Frantic attempts at resuscitation began immediately. But despite these efforts, George Lopez was pronounced dead at the scene from drowning. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the local community. George was described by friends and family as a kind, energetic teenager with his whole life ahead of him. His parents were devastated, struggling to understand how their son could have drowned in a supervised attraction. In the aftermath of George's death, Action Park made minimal changes to the wave pool's operation. The park added more lifeguards and implemented some additional safety measures, but the fundamental dangers remained. Remarkably, the wave pool continued to operate, and the park faced no significant legal consequences. What made George Lopez's death even more tragic was that it wasn't enough to prompt meaningful change. Despite this clear warning sign, Action Park's wave pool would claim 2 more lives in the years that followed. In August 1984, 20-year-old Donald DePass drowned in the same pool, and in 1987, 18-year-old Gregory Grandchamps became the 3rd victim. Action Park's response to these incidents followed a disturbing pattern. The park would implement minor changes, enough to satisfy basic requirements, but never addressed the fundamental design flaws that made the wave pool inherently dangerous. The park's owner had created his own insurance company to underwrite the park's liability, effectively insulating himself from the financial consequences of accidents and deaths. George Lopez's death in 1982 marked the beginning of Action Park's darkest chapter. Over its 18 years of operation, at least 6 people would die at the park, earning it nicknames like Class Action Park and Traction Park among locals who were all too familiar with its dangers. Today, George Lopez is remembered as the first victim of a park that prioritized extreme thrills over basic safety. His death at just 15 years old serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences when amusement parks operate without proper oversight. A young life needlessly lost to negligence and the pursuit of profit. It was October 6, 2016, at a regional fairground, where crowds moved beneath glowing midway lights as a Ferris wheel turned steadily above damp pavement on an overcast evening. Evan Brooks was 27 and had recently begun trying to build a small online following through short vlogs and stunt clips. He worked full-time as a delivery driver out of Tacoma, spending long days on the road and filming whenever he had time off. His videos were simple: rides, heights, risky angles meant to look fearless. Friends said he liked showing he was calm in situations that made others nervous, especially when there was a camera involved. That evening, Evan arrived alone after finishing his route early. Weather reports earlier in the day had mentioned scattered thunderstorms moving toward Pierce County, but the fair remained open. The air was warm and heavy, clouds gathering low over the grounds. Evan bought multiple tickets for the Ferris wheel, telling friends later online that he wanted storm footage from above the fair. Warning lights near the ride signaled that weather could cause delays, and recorded announcements repeated that the wheel might stop without notice. Evan boarded anyway, phone already recording. The gondola rose slowly as wind pushed lightly against the cabin. Below him, the midway lights blurred into long streaks across the wet pavement. As the wheel climbed higher, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the fairgrounds. Evan continued filming, leaning toward the open side window to keep the clouds in frame. Other riders later said he appeared focused on his phone, adjusting angles instead of watching the ride. Near the top of the rotation, the wheel slowed as operators prepared for a possible shutdown. Wind gusts rocked the gondola gently. The metal frame creaked overhead. Evan shifted forward again, stretching his arm out to capture the darkening sky. A sudden flash lit the clouds nearby. The thunder followed almost immediately. Witnesses said Evan flinched at the sound. In the same moment, the gondola swayed sharply in the wind. Still leaning forward with one hand braced against the window frame, Evan lost his balance. His upper body tipped past the open side. Security footage later showed him trying to pull back, his phone slipping from his hand as his weight shifted outward. With only a low metal lap bar across the opening, his torso slid over it and through the gap. In less than a second, his hips cleared the seat edge, and he fell from the gondola. Operators stopped the wheel immediately and called emergency services at 8:17 p.m. Fare staff cleared the area as responders arrived within minutes. Evan was found on the ground beneath the Ferris wheel, unresponsive and bleeding heavily from head and chest injuries. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but no pulse or breathing was detected. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death multiple blunt force injuries from a fall from height. Fractures to the skull, spine, and internal organs indicated death occurred instantly on impact. Investigators found no mechanical failure with the gondola and confirmed weather conditions had not yet reached shutdown thresholds when Evan boarded. Witness statements and video showed he had been leaning out of the open side while filming when he lost his balance. The Ferris wheel closed for the night as storms moved in. Evan's phone was recovered near the base of the ride, its final recording ending in blurred lights and wind noise just before the fall. It was September 1st, 2018. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across a popular theme park in Orange County, California, where crowds gathered for Labor Day weekend festivities. Derek Collins, a 21-year-old engineering student, stood in line for the log flume ride with 4 college friends, visibly intoxicated and laughing too loudly. Derek wasn't a troublemaker by nature, but he had developed a dangerous drinking pattern during his 3 years at a state university. Friends described him as intelligent but impulsive when drunk, someone who took dares too seriously and craved attention. That afternoon, Derek had consumed approximately 8 beers and 3 shots of whiskey over 4 hours at a nearby parking lot tailgate party before entering the park. His blood alcohol content would later be measured at 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. Log flume rides are deceptively simple attractions where passengers sit in hollowed-out artificial logs that float through water channels before plunging down steep drops at speeds reaching 40 miles per hour. The rides feature minimal restraint systems or lap bars designed to keep riders seated during the descent, but they are not always secured. Park regulations explicitly prohibit intoxicated guests from boarding any rides, with trained staff positioned to identify impaired visitors. Derek's flushed face and unsteady gait should have been obvious warning signs. At 4:15 in the afternoon, Derek and his friends approached the ride entrance. The teenage ride operator noticed Derek's unsteady gait but misjudged the level of his impairment and continued loading the next log. Derek climbed into the front seat of a 6-person log, his friends filling in behind him, one already recording video on his phone. As the log began its slow climb up the 42-foot lift hill, Derek started joking about standing up. His friends laughed, encouraging him. The ride's drop photo and nearby CCTV later showed Derek shifting forward and rising in the log as it crested the lift. The ride operator radioed security, but the log had already reached the top of the drop. Derek stood partially upright just as the log tipped over the edge, accelerating down the 50-degree incline. His alcohol-impaired balance failed completely. Instead of sitting back down, he pitched forward over the front of the log. His friends' laughter turned to screams as Derek tumbled over the nose of the vessel at approximately 38 miles per hour. Derek's body was projected forward over the nose of the log, veering left as it cleared the channel and struck the concrete apron beside the runout pool. His body went limp instantly, sliding into the shallow runout water as his friend's log splashed down behind him. Other riders began screaming as streaks of blood clouded the runout water. The ride operator hit the emergency stop within seconds and called park security at 4:18 in the afternoon. Paramedics arrived by 4:24 in the afternoon, but Derek showed no signs of life. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed massive skull fracture, severe brain laceration, and catastrophic subdural hemorrhage. Death was instantaneous from blunt force trauma. A friend had filmed the incident on a phone, and police seized the device and made a forensic copy. The friend later deleted any social uploads. The park halted alcohol sales for the night, expanded sobriety checks at entry, retrained staff, and pledged to work with local regulators on tougher enforcement. Derek's death prompted stricter enforcement protocols across the amusement park. It was June 9, 2015, and the New Jersey boardwalk was doing what it always does on an early summer evening. Loud, crowded, and lit up from one end to the other. The amusement pier was packed, every ride running, every queue stretched back into the midway. Jada Brackett was 52 years old, working in local real estate, a field that rewards people who never accept the first no, who treat every boundary as a starting point for negotiation, and who measure success by how often they get their way. She had built her identity around that approach, and she applied it everywhere. She was there with coworkers for a company retreat, and from the moment they arrived, she was running the show, picking rides, setting the order, deciding when the group moved. The steel looping coaster was the centerpiece of the pier. 2 vertical loops, a corkscrew, a high-speed helix, and sustained G-forces for nearly a minute. Health warnings were posted at the queue and repeated on screens. Riders with heart or vascular issues were advised not to ride. What the group didn't know was that Jada had been dealing with warning signs for weeks: chest tightness, a pulsing sensation in her upper chest, and one episode of sharp back pain that forced her to sit down mid-conversation. A doctor had warned it could point to a developing aortic issue, and that she needed imaging. She hadn't scheduled it, telling herself it was stress. Jada had also spent the previous 20 minutes arguing with a ride attendant near the loading platform after repeatedly unbuckling and readjusting her restraint. The lead operator backed the attendant's call, requiring all riders to remain secured. The confrontation left tension, but Jada dismissed it. Even in line, she felt the pressure again, a tightness in her chest, and paused, one hand on the railing. A coworker asked if she wanted to skip. She laughed it off and stayed. After the first cycle, the train returned and riders began unloading. Jada stayed seated. She pressured a younger floor attendant, not the main operator but closest to her row, into letting her stay on, implying she had connections and could cause trouble. The main operator was focused elsewhere, leaving the attendant alone to manage her row. Inexperienced and overwhelmed, he gave in and signaled her restraint was locked. Jada knew exactly who to turn to. She picked the teenager because she realized he was the easiest to manipulate. Riders in the nearly empty front cars filmed themselves during the second launch, footage later used in the investigation. Midway through the second cycle, during the high-speed helix where G-forces peak, witnesses noticed Jada had stopped reacting. The sustained force pressed her into the seat as her heart rate spiked and blood pressure surged. The exact strain her symptoms had warned about. Her head shifted sideways. Most assumed she had passed out. It wasn't until the train returned and she remained motionless that staff realized something was wrong. Emergency responders removed her as the area was cleared. Investigators later determined she suffered a ruptured thoracic aortic aneurysm, consistent with extreme G-force stress on a weakened aorta. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at a nearby hospital. In the weeks that followed, the ride stayed closed during an investigation. Officials found dispatch required final operator confirmation, leading to retraining and stricter enforcement. The attendant was reassigned, and witnesses later said the confrontation was the moment it could have stopped, but didn't. It was October 10, 2015, at a large amusement park on the eastern edge of Kolkata, India, where the afternoon heat pressed flat against every surface and the smell of fried food drifted across softened asphalt. By the time an emergency operator received the first call, the coaster was still moving along the return track. Riva Chandra was 20 years old, a second-year commerce student at a mid-sized city university. Devon Suri was 19 and in his first year of the same program. They had been together for just under a month. Friends later described described them as almost inseparable in the way new couples tend to be, loud about it, close in public, prone to making decisions together that neither would have made alone. I think we've all been there, and having that in mind made me sympathize with them a little more in this story. They had come to the park with a group of classmates. By early afternoon, the group had split off toward different areas, leaving Riva and Devin on their own. Devin had been photographing the visit since they arrived. Selfies at every stop, video clips of rides from outside the queues. His camera roll, recovered by investigators, showed 43 photos taken that day before the last one. The coaster swept through its circuit, steel cars rattling along a track that curved back toward the station through a banked section partially hidden behind support beams. From the pathway, the view cut off just before the turn, a blind spot where the train would reappear with little warning. A chain-link fence ran along that stretch, broken only by a single staff-only crossing point. When I picture that blind spot, it just feels like a place you don't step into unless you completely ignore what it is. Riva and Devin moved toward it as the ride cycled. They climbed over the small maintenance gate and stepped onto the return track. A family near the queue noticed first, watching as the two of them walked further in. A park employee about 40 feet away shouted at them twice. Two other visitors along the fence line joined in. Neither of them reacted. Devin had his phone raised, angled down the track where the train would come out of the blind curve, framing the shot. And for what? Honestly, a photo that wasn't even going to be worth it? The train entered the banked curve at approximately 28 miles per hour. The operator in the control booth had no sightline to that section of the return track. A bystander struck the alert panel on the outer fence, and the operator engaged the emergency brake, but the train had already closed the distance. The front car made contact with both of them within the same second. Witnesses standing near the queue described the sound as short and dull. Not the crash most people imagine, but something closer to an impact absorbed by mass. It was over in under 2 seconds. Riva's body was thrown laterally and struck a vertical support column at the track's edge, coming to rest against its base roughly 6 feet from the point of impact. A family with young children standing nearby watched her slide against the concrete and stop moving. Devin was caught beneath the front section of the car as the emergency brake engaged, his lower body pinned against the rail and frame. The train came to a full stop approximately 11 feet past the point of contact. The operator immediately called park dispatch. A staff supervisor reached the scene within 3 minutes. Emergency medical services arrived in 10 minutes. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report identified blunt force polytrauma in both victims, compound pelvic and lower extremity fractures, bilateral rib fractures, internal hemorrhaging consistent with high-velocity blunt impact, and cranial trauma. Neither survived long enough for intervention. The park suspended operations on the ride for 3 days pending inspection. No mechanical fault was identified anywhere in the system. Local amusement park authorities conducted a post-incident inspection before the ride reopened. Riva and Devin's families received their belongings, including Devin's phone, within the week. I don't think this story has a version where the outcome changes without one of them choosing not to cross that barrier. It was September 18th, 2016 in Japan. In the backstage maintenance corridor of an entertainment resort in eastern Japan, a place built for wonder on the outside but ran like a factory floor behind the curtains, and that distinction was about to change someone's life. On that day, the resort was carrying out scheduled maintenance inside one of its flagship attractions, a facility that combined robotics, hydraulic motion systems, synchronized stage platforms, and human-sized figures. Maintenance windows between guest cycles were often compressed during busy periods, forcing testing and preparation to overlap. The backstage area was separated from public access by corridors, temporary gates, and marked floor boundaries rather than fully solid barriers. Among the invited media guests that day was Francis Wright, a 31-year-old technology influencer from the United Kingdom, who had built a strong online following through content focused on robotics demonstrations, engineering tours, and behind-the-scenes theme park technology. He was on a multi-country Asian content tour, with the Japan visit positioned as a key stop due to the country's reputation for advanced robotics in entertainment. Guests were told to stay inside the marked observation areas and not enter active maintenance zones without a supervising technician. Later testimony revealed that these instructions were not always communicated clearly during transitions between test cycles. Warning lights and audio alerts are only activated during certain movement phases rather than running continuously. I have to be honest here. The instructions and warnings were not communicated clearly. I think that matters a lot when you have unprofessional guests. At around 4:18 in the afternoon, technicians began a controlled movement test to check how well the animatronic's rotating base and arms were lining up during operation. The maintenance floor was divided into 3 separate areas: a marked corridor where observers were meant to stand, a service walkway used by the engineers, and an active motion zone that surrounded the base of the animatronic itself. Francis had been filming from the designated corridor with the media group, but visibility of the mechanism was partially blocked from that position. During a brief moment when engineers moved to a side console to review calibration readings, Francis stepped closer to the boundary and then entered the restricted maintenance floor with his handheld camera rig. At roughly the same moment, the system moved into its next automated alignment sequence. The base platform engaged, and the animatronic rotated more quickly than the previous phase, with one articulated arm sweeping downward as part of its programmed arc. Francis attempted to step back, but a fixed maintenance railing and structural frame blocked his retreat. Emergency stop controls were triggered within seconds, but hydraulic inertia meant the movement did not stop instantly. I think that was hydraulic inertia. The stop button was pressed, and it still was not fast enough. I find that one of the hardest details in this story. Someone did the right thing, and it still did not matter. Francis sustained severe crush injuries and internal trauma, and was transported to a regional trauma center. He was pronounced dead that evening. Following the incident, the resort suspended all backstage media access to active maintenance areas and introduced interlocked access gates tied directly to the motion control systems. Investigators concluded the system had operated within its programmed parameters, but identified several procedural failures, including inconsistent communication of motion cycle status among staff, limited visibility of warning indicators from certain angles, and a gap in media escort coverage during the transition between test cycles. It was June 2, 1997. Quimby Galati was a bright, ambitious young woman just days away from her high school graduation. That day, Quimby and her fellow Napa High School seniors were visiting Waterworld USA, a water park in Concord, California, when the unimaginable happened, forever changing the lives of the teenagers. At 18 years old, Quimby Galati was a model student known for her vivacious personality, her involvement in the school's mock trial club, and her dedication to academic excellence. Like many of her classmates, Quimby was excited to celebrate the last days of high school with her peers before embarking on the next chapter of her life. That day at Waterworld was part of the traditional senior trip, a long-awaited event filled with anticipation. She and her classmates, along with chaperones, had boarded buses early that morning, eager to make memories before graduation, which was just days away. Waterworld USA, now known as Six Flags Hurricane Harbor Concord, was a relatively new water park, having opened just 2 years prior. The park was known for its towering slides and thrilling water attractions, and Napa High students had chosen it specifically for the excitement it promised. Among its many rides, the Banzai Pipeline stood out, a tall, open-air water slide that had become iconic for its steep drops and fast twists. With the excitement of the day also came a tradition. For years, Napa High seniors had clogged the water slides on their annual trip, a practice in which groups of students would pack the slides and go down in large numbers, defying safety rules in pursuit of fun. It was a well-known ritual, and this year's graduating class had grand plans. Whispers among the students suggested that more than 70 of them wanted to take part in clogging the Banzai Pipeline. Even though it was a risky stunt, most were eager to participate, seeking to end their senior year with a bang. As the day drew to a close, the park announced over the loudspeakers that it was time for the Napa High group to head back to their buses. Instead of leaving, dozens of students rushed to the Banzai Pipeline. Quimby, like many of her friends, was among them. Along with 32 other students, she climbed to the top of the slide, where a lifeguard was stationed to ensure safety. However, the group pushed past the lifeguard, determined to carry out their plan. The lifeguard blew her whistle and shouted, but it was too late. 33 students piled onto the slide at once. Moments later, disaster struck. The weight of the students proved too much for the slide structure, and it began to buckle. The fiberglass cracked under the pressure, and in a matter of seconds, the section of the slide that held the most students collapsed. The teenagers were thrown 40 feet to the ground below, some hitting the wooden support beams on their way down. Chaos ensued. Park goers watched in horror as bodies fell from the sky, some landing on concrete, others in shallow water, bushes, or against each other. Some were more fortunate than others. Many suffered broken bones and internal injuries, but one student would not survive. Quimby Gilati, the bright and promising 18-year-old, suffered catastrophic injuries to her head and chest after striking a support beam. Despite efforts to save her, she died from her injuries 45 minutes after the accident. The other injured students were rushed to nearby hospitals, and many would recover. But Quimby's death left a mark on her classmates and community. Napa High School's graduation ceremony, held just 10 days after the accident, was a somber affair. Some students attended in wheelchairs, while first responders and medical staff were invited to honor the lives affected by the tragedy. But Quimby Gilati wasn't there to graduate. Lawsuits followed, including a wrongful death suit filed by Quimby's father, Larry Gilati, who sought justice for the loss of his daughter. In the end, Quimby's family settled for $1.7 million, the largest of all the settlements related to the accident. Napa High School also established the Quimby Gilati Memorial Scholarship Assembly to provide financial aid and guidance to future students. The tragedy at Waterworld USA led to significant changes in water park safety regulations across the country. The Banzai Pipeline was permanently closed, and parks nationwide implemented stricter capacity limits and more rigorous enforcement of safety rules. The practice of clogging slides, once seen as a harmless senior prank, was recognized for the deadly risk it truly posed. For the Napa High School class of 1997, what should have been a joyous celebration of their achievements became a life-altering tragedy. The empty chair at graduation, meant for Quimby, served as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. Her classmates, who had planned to embark on their adult lives together, instead found themselves grappling with grief, survivor's guilt, and the harsh reality that actions have consequences. Today, more than 2 decades later, Quimby Gilati's memory lives on through the scholarship in her name and in the hearts of those who knew her. Her tragic death stands as a sobering reminder of the importance of safety regulations and the devastating cost when they are ignored. What began as a day of celebration ended in heartbreak. A promising young life cut short in the pursuit of one final high school thrill. It was July 28, 2018, inside a horror tunnel ride at a large amusement park in Guangzhou, China. The afternoon was hot, lines were long, and the ride cycled continuously. Dim lighting, artificial fog, and loud sound effects masked small technical problems that blended easily into the attraction's intended chaos. Lin Xiao was 32 and worked as a retail clerk at a mid-range clothing store, spending most days on her feet, folding clothes, restocking shelves, and calming irritated customers. She lived modestly, rarely traveled, and had not taken a proper day off in nearly a year. The park visit was planned for a friend's birthday, meant to be light and forgettable. Lin wasn't chasing attention online. She only recorded short clips to send to friends, usually small moments to remember a rare outing. The horror tunnel was an indoor dark ride, built to look rundown on purpose. Exposed pipes, flickering lights, fake electrical panels, and dangling wires were part of the set design. Warning signs at the entrance instructed riders to remain seated, keep their hands inside the vehicle, and avoid touching props. Operators repeated the rules as cars loaded, but the line moved fast, and most riders treated it casually. Lin boarded a 2-row car with 3 friends. As the ride began, she lifted her phone, filming the darkness and sudden flashes. The car moved slowly through tight corridors while animatronics lunged from the walls. Midway through the ride, the car stalled briefly near a section designed to look like a flooded electrical room. Yellow and black hazard stripes were painted along the wall, and fake sparks flashed overhead. Lin leaned sideways for a better angle. The lighting was low, and she mistook an electrified effect panel for part of the set. A high-voltage spark effect unit was built into the wall as part of the set, normally protected by a clear plastic barrier. and a small warning label indicating not to touch the electrified prop. Surveillance footage later showed Lynn extending her arm outside the car, reaching past the clear safety barrier to steady herself against the electrified wall while continuing to record. Her fingers made contact with the electrified effect rod. Witnesses in the car felt a sudden jolt as Lynn's body stiffened. Her phone dropped into her lap as her arm locked in place against the wall. The electrical current traveled through her hand, across her chest, and into a grounded metal handrail beside the seat, completing the circuit through her body. Sparks were visible for a brief moment, captured on a camera mounted near the ceiling. The ride continued moving for several seconds before stopping automatically due to a power fault. Lynn collapsed forward in her seat, unresponsive. Her friends screamed and tried to shake her, but she did not move. Smoke lingered in the tunnel and emergency lights switched on as operators initiated an evacuation. Staff reached the car within 3 minutes and found Lynn unresponsive, with no breathing or pulse. Paramedics arrived about 7 minutes later, attempted CPR and defibrillation, and pronounced her dead at the scene. The post-mortem ruled electrocution as the cause, noting electrical burns on her hand and cardiac arrest caused by current passing through her body. Investigators confirmed she had reached past a safety barrier and made direct contact with an intentionally electrified effect prop inside the tunnel. The ride closed that day for inspection and safety review, and her phone was returned, its final video cutting to black. It was October 12, 2013. One of Tokyo City's amusement park hummed with its usual Saturday afternoon energy, roller coasters cycling through their loops while families moved between attractions. In a restricted maintenance corridor behind a roller coaster, 25-year-old Kaito Nakamura was about to make the last questionable decision of his life. Kaito was a third-year business student at a private university in Shibuya, known among classmates for increasingly reckless stunts. They accompanied him trespassing in construction sites, climbing transmission towers, and sneaking into off-limits areas. Friends described him as desperate for attention, someone who constantly needed to one-up his previous stunts. He had received multiple warnings from university administrators about his activities. That specific roller coaster in Tokyo had a maintenance zone that housed heavy cart transport systems that moved along floor-mounted rails, shuttling ride vehicles between the main track and service bays. The service carts weighed approximately 800 pounds empty and carried 600-pound ride vehicles, totaling roughly 1,400 pounds when loaded. Floors were normally clean and dry, but a recent maintenance task left a slick patch of hydraulic fluid near the rails. Multiple signs in Japanese warned unauthorized personnel about crush hazards and moving equipment, with access restricted by locked gates, keypad-controlled doors, and motion sensors. That afternoon, Kaito arrived at the park with 3 friends who knew about his plan to infiltrate the maintenance area. His friends said that he planned to climb the service fence, photograph himself beside the actual ride mechanisms, and escape. His friends protested weakly, pointing out the danger signs, but Kaito dismissed their concerns as cowardice. He had successfully trespassed in dozens of locations without incident, likely building a false confidence. At 2:47 in the afternoon, an exterior security camera captured Kaito scaling the chain-link barrier, while his friends watched nervously from outside. Internal cameras in the corridor recorded him as he landed. Although cameras covered the corridor, the live operator was focused on passenger loading and ride dispatch monitors rather than the maintenance transport feed. Carts moved every 4 minutes along the rails. Warning lights flashed amber throughout the corridor, indicating the system was operational. The automated cart system was live because a maintenance crew was working on a different section of the track, requiring transport carts to remain active to shuttle vehicles between service bays. Full lockout-tagout procedures had not been applied to the transport corridor. Kaito seemed to have ignored everything, likely focusing on getting the perfect shot. Moving deeper into the restricted space, Kaito positioned himself near the rail system for a photograph. The concrete floor was coated with a thin layer of hydraulic oil left from a recent repair. As he turned to signal his friends, his feet slid out from under him. He fell directly into the path of an incoming transport cart carrying a fully loaded 1,400-pound coaster vehicle, moving at approximately 8 miles per hour. Emergency brakes engaged immediately but could not stop the cart in time. The crushing impact was instantaneous. Kaito's body was compressed between the cart and a concrete support pillar, causing catastrophic blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. The impact left extensive blood evidence across the cart and surrounding structure. His friends screamed, and one immediately called emergency services. Park medics reached the corridor within 4 minutes but could not provide life-saving intervention. First responders arrived within 7 minutes. The coroner determined death occurred within seconds from catastrophic blunt force trauma to the thorax, resulting in multiple rib fractures, collapsed lungs, and severe heart damage. Toxicology tests were negative. Surveillance footage from the exterior and corridor cameras confirmed the entire sequence from illegal entry to fatal impact. Park management handed all footage to authorities. They interviewed his 3 friends regarding the incident and noted their delayed call to security. The friends required psychological counseling for months, haunted by watching their peer die for their validation in a completely preventable tragedy. It was August 18, 2017, and Wisconsin Dells was running at full capacity. The indoor water park attached to River Canyon Adventure Park was the kind of place that gets loud by mid-morning and doesn't quiet down until closing time. Toni Garrick was 42 and worked in home goods retail, which seemed to convince her she never had to listen to customer service workers again. She treated rules like suggestions, argued over everything, and believed being loud long enough would make her right. She had pushed for the trip herself, a late summer family outing before her oldest son went back to school. By the time her family reached the raft ride, she had already complained about the lines. Honestly, I get Toni's point. I also hate waiting in lines. It is exhausting. The circular raft ride enforced a strict 600-pound combined rider limit. It was on overhead signs, digital monitors printed on the rafts, and repeated verbally by every attendant before loading. The reason was structural. Overloaded rafts sat too low entering the high current sections, and the channels were not built to handle that displacement. When Toni's family stepped onto the scale and came in more than 130 pounds over the limit, the attendant told them they needed to split into 2 separate rafts. That was where it started. She told him he was reading the scale wrong. He checked it again and confirmed the number. She told him the limit was excessive and that other parks didn't enforce it this strictly. He explained the structural reason. She agreed, loudly and in the way that made it clear she wasn't actually agreeing. She was performing compliance long enough to get the supervisor to walk away. The moment he turned around, she started moving. She shuffled her sons between adjacent queue lines, repositioned her husband, kept the group in motion while attendants managed a separate loading delay nearby. By the time the raft reached dispatch, the platform attendant believed the weight issue had been resolved upstream. When a staff member glanced at the loaded raft and started walking toward it, Toni told him they had already been cleared. Witnesses on the platform later told investigators the raft was visibly sitting lower in the water than every other one leaving the dock. Sidewalls dangerously close to the waterline before it even reached the first channel. The raft hit the rapids already sitting too low, so every wave struck harder. At the first break, it tilted toward Toni's side, her son slid into her, and the weight shift forced water over the edge. The raft slammed into the guide wall and flipped in the narrow channel. All 4 were thrown out. Her husband and son surfaced downstream, but Toni did not. The overturned raft jammed against a submerged steel fin, pinning her beneath. The current pressed it down, rolling it against the structure, and her head was driven into the fin and channel floor with no space to escape. Lifeguards entered on tether lines while operators killed the upstream flow. It took roughly 2 minutes to wedge the raft free and pull her out. If you were Toni, would you really risk your family's life just to get what you want? Paramedics performed CPR on the unloading platform before transporting her to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Investigators confirmed severe blunt force head injuries from repeated underwater impacts against the submerged guide structure, compounded by drowning-related injuries. The ride was shut down for inspection and operational review, with stricter load enforcement procedures put in place. Her family survived the incident, but they were left to deal with the kind of loss that doesn't really settle. One that started with a line, a rule, and a decision to ignore both. It was August 3rd, 2017, at a commercial water park on the northern outskirts of Mumbai, India. A day hot enough that the concrete paths burned underfoot, and one man was about to find the single mechanism in that park built to move water at force, at exactly the wrong moment. Ronak Setia was 34 years old and worked as a shift supervisor at a regional freight distribution company in Mumbai's western suburbs. His co-workers described him as loud in the way that tends to read as confidence, always the first to suggest a round, always the last to leave. He had been passed over for a senior logistics role twice before finally receiving a promotion the previous week. The water park trip was his idea of marking the occasion properly. He arrived with 4 co-workers mid-morning, carrying a cooler bag that gate staff later confirmed was only superficially inspected and not fully checked against restricted area rules. By early afternoon, witnesses placed him near the deep end of the wave pool, unsteady, laughing at nothing in particular, submerging near the far wall and surfacing again. Lifeguards had shouted at him at least 3 times. He had climbed over a waist-high metal fence marking the clearly signed restricted mechanical area. I kept thinking about how this ends differently if he just turns around once. The wave pool used a pneumatic system, with guarded intake grates behind a reinforced wall pulling water inward every 40 seconds to generate waves. Families at the shallow end told investigators they watched Ronak submerging near the far wall repeatedly. 2 children on the pool steps pointed at him. Their parents began moving them toward the exit. Park CCTV captured him entering the restricted zone despite repeated warnings. Then the next cycle began. Witnesses described the water near the far wall pulling inward in a visible depression before Ronak was pressed against the grate by the suction. The force pinned him in place, preventing coordinated movement, and his chest was held tightly against the grate, restricting his ability to breathe. He did not struggle effectively, his limbs flailing briefly before his body went still. Lifeguards reached him within 20 seconds and attempted to pull him free by his arms and torso. They could not move him. One guard later described the resistance as similar to trying to pull someone against a fixed steel structure underwater. A second guard entered the water and tried to wedge between Ronak's body and the grate. He could not get any leverage. A lifeguard immediately activated the emergency stop switch within seconds of seeing him trapped. Staff cut power to the wave system after roughly 10 more seconds, and the suction released. Ronak was pulled to the pool's edge. Medical observers at the scene noted signs of severe chest compression from the sustained pressure against the grate, particularly on the right side. He was not breathing and had no pulse. Bystanders on the deck stood back. Several covered their children's eyes. Park staff contacted emergency services the moment the system was stopped. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and worked on him poolside. No pulse was established. He was declared dead at the scene. The medical examiner found multiple bilateral rib fractures consistent with sustained compressive force, pulmonary contusion to both lung fields, traumatic cardiac compression, and hypoxic brain injury. Cause of death was compressive asphyxia with secondary cardiac arrest. Ronak's family held the funeral 4 days later at a cremation ground in his home district. His co-workers attended as a group. The promotion that had started the day was mentioned once, briefly, by someone near the back. I think about the lifeguards who reached him in 20 seconds and still could not pull him free. They did everything they were supposed to, and I don't think any training truly prepares you for that. It was June 15th, 2017. The afternoon sun blazed over a major Southern California theme park, casting crisp shadows across the midway where families lined up for attractions promising harmless thrills. However, one summer shift would dissolve into tragedy before the cotton candy vendors finished restocking. 18-year-old Ethan Morales, a seasonal employee 3 weeks into a lead-in training role, had been instructed to keep the 3:20 p.m. rotation moving. Other colleagues were aware that Ethan wanted the supervisor's praise. He wanted to look competent in front of the crowd. He had a reputation among co-workers for being eager and a little too clever with shortcuts. He liked to joke that rules were suggestions, and he'd already earned praise from a manager for shaving 30 seconds off the queue time earlier that afternoon. The swing attraction was a rotating swing chair carousel with chain-hung seats, equipped with individual lap bars secured by a ratchet-locking powel. Lap bars were supposed to be tested with a firm push, until resistance was felt. A click was heard, and a green indicator aligned. A small maintenance issue had nagged the ride for weeks. One lap bar on row 3 stuck intermittently, and the ratchet pawl showed surface corrosion at the hinge bolt. Maintenance had logged the note but taped a temporary warning tag to the control box and prioritized other repairs. The ride still passed daily inspections on paper because the sensor auto cutoff had been temporarily bypassed following repeated nuisance trips. An entry that, in the bustle, hadn't been verified by the supervisor that morning. As guests climbed in, Ethan juggled the loading drill like a circus act. Because he was trying to keep lines short and already had a broom tucked against the rear platform to sweep debris, he hit on what he thought was a brilliant time saver. Prop the problematic lap bar open with the broom handle so riders could slide in smoothly, then give it a quick shove to lock it in place. When the next cycle approached, there happened to be one empty seat in row 3. Someone shouted that the bar still needed testing. Without thinking through policy, without calling maintenance, and eager to prove the bar would click, Ethan climbed down into the empty bucket seat, jammed the broom handle between the lap bar and the seat lip, and pressed the bar with his foot until it engaged. He meant to sit for 5 seconds and then hop out, test, then resume his station. A co-worker shouted a warning he didn't hear. A manager on the headset called for the cycle to start as the ride was cued. In the chaos, Ethan forgot the golden rule: never be on the ride while it's about to start. The ride started. Centrifugal forces that normally kept secured riders in place worked against a lap bar propped from beneath. The broom, wedged at an angle and not designed to bear shear forces, began to slip almost immediately as the ride accelerated. The altered load path shifted dynamic shear onto the corroded ratchet pawl, which finally released on the 8th rotation. Ethan's hands scrabbled for the handles. The lap bar pivoted upward, then broke free. He was flung outward from a moving seat traveling about 12 feet before striking the fence that ringed the ride. The impact was catastrophic and immediate. A park EMT-trained first aid attendant stationed in the adjacent operations corridor reached the scene within moments and immediately recognized the severity. Paramedics arrived shortly and pronounced Ethan dead at 4:12 p.m. Park management shuttered the ride the same day. Regulators cited multiple violations after reviewing CCTV footage, control logs, and maintenance records. Disabled sensors, poor maintenance follow-through, inadequate supervisory verification, and unsafe operator behavior. The manager who'd urged faster cycles faced internal review for pushing throughput over procedure. The ride remained closed for months while refurbishment, retraining, and a full redesign of barrier protection and interlocks were completed. It was the 22nd of July, 2015 in Orlando, Florida. A regional park was packed under the summer sun, which had pushed the temperature above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and somewhere inside the thrill ride sector, a young woman was setting up a camera and telling her live stream audience she was ready. Lena Vale was 26 years old, slim and polished, and carefully camera-ready, a wellness influencer whose online platform was built around calorie control and weight loss routines, and had the disciplined appearance of someone who had everything under control. And she had not eaten a proper meal that day because she wanted to look right on camera, living instead on caffeine and small snacks while the Florida heat built steadily around her. She was not an endurance athlete and had never pretended to be, but weeks earlier, a fitness creator had publicly tagged her in a viral amusement park challenge, joking that she would tap out after a few rides. Lots of comments had piled up daring her to prove otherwise, and Lena had agreed to do it live because the alternative was letting the mockery stand, and that felt worse than anything a roller coaster could do to her. I find it strange that she didn't eat because she wanted to look good for the camera. The thing that was supposed to make her look strong was already making her fragile before the first ride even started. She did not fully understand what repeated coaster cycling combined with heat and dehydration and continuous vomiting would actually do to a body that had not been properly fed or hydrated, and nobody around her understood it clearly enough to stop what was coming. The challenge began just after noon. afternoon, with Lena laughing through the early rides and joking dramatically for the camera, the high-speed steel launch coaster throwing her through rapid acceleration and aggressive directional changes cycle after cycle, while the afternoon heat pressed down on everything. Within the first hour, she was vomiting near the ride exit, telling the camera it was just motion sickness, telling her crew she was fine, getting back in the queue, and as the afternoon deepened, the vomiting kept coming, and her speech began to slow, and her balance became unsteady, and she started losing count of how many cycles she had completed. Her crew correcting her on camera while viewers watching the live stream began leaving comments saying something looked wrong. I have thought about that more than once. Thousands of strangers watching a screen could tell something was wrong before the people right there, and nobody next to her could act on it on time. Park employees eventually approached her and told her to sit down and get medical help, and she looked at them and turned toward the queue staircase, telling them how stopping meant losing, and losing publicly after days of audience buildup felt like the only outcome she could not survive. On the elevated metal staircase leading back up to the coaster platform, her body finally made the decision for her, her coordination giving way without warning, sending her sideways into the stair structure and then down onto the concrete below, the live stream cutting off as guests and staff rushed toward her. Lena died from traumatic injuries sustained in the fall, medical findings also identifying severe heat stroke, dehydration, and prolonged vomiting as the factors that had steadily dismantled her physical awareness and judgment long before she reached those stairs. I believe her body had been making the decision for hours, because by the time she fell, she had already lost the ability to judge how badly she was doing. The stairs only just made it final. The investigation found no fault with the park or the ride itself, only the accumulation of hours of ignored warning signs. The fitness creator who had started everything later removing the original challenge videos after public backlash, and the park introduced stricter intervention policies for guests showing visible signs of heat illness. The last thing Lena's audience saw before the stream cut out was someone who had confused not quitting with being safe, when by then the two things had long since stopped being the same. It was July 8, 1980. A bright summer day at Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey, turned tragic when 19-year-old George Larson Jr. embarked on what would be his final ride. The Alpine Slide, one of the park's most popular attractions, was about to claim its first victim, forever changing the legacy of a place that would later become known as Class Action Park for its numerous accidents and lawsuits. George was a typical teenager enjoying a day at the notorious amusement park nestled in the mountains of northern New Jersey. Action Park had opened just 2 years earlier in 1978, quickly gaining popularity for its extreme attractions that pushed the boundaries of safety. The Alpine Slide was one of the park's signature rides, a 2,700-foot-long concrete and fiberglass track that snaked down the mountain, where riders would descend on small plastic sleds equipped with a simple handbrake. Unlike modern water slides with their carefully engineered safety features, the Alpine Slide was primitive by comparison. The track was made of concrete, fiberglass, and asbestos, materials that would cause severe abrasions if a rider fell off their sled. The only protection riders had was a small handbrake that often malfunctioned, leaving them with a terrifying choice: risk going too fast and flying off the track, or brake too hard and get rammed from behind by another rider. On that fateful day, George mounted his sled at the top of the mountain, likely feeling the same mix of excitement and trepidation that most riders experienced. The Alpine Slide offered a thrilling descent with sharp turns and steep drops. As he pushed off and began his journey down the mountain, everything seemed normal at first. Other park-goers were enjoying their day, unaware that they were about to witness a horrific accident. As George navigated a particularly tricky section of the track, something went terribly wrong. According to witnesses, his sled suddenly jumped the track on a curve. The momentum carried him off the concrete chute and sent him flying through the air. In a split second, George's head violently struck a large rock adjacent to the track. The impact was catastrophic. Park employees rushed to the scene, finding George unconscious and severely injured. Emergency services were called, and he was quickly transported to a nearby hospital. For 8 days, George fought for his life in the hospital, but the injuries to his head were too severe. On July 16, 1980, George Larson Jr. succumbed to his injuries, becoming Action Park's first recorded fatality. The investigation that followed revealed troubling details about the Alpine Slide's safety record. Former employees later admitted that accidents on the slide were so common that the park had purchased an additional ambulance specifically to transport injured riders to the hospital. On busy days, it wasn't unusual for the slide to cause dozens of injuries, ranging from scrapes and bruises to broken bones and concussions. What made George's death even more tragic was how preventable it was. The Alpine slide had been plagued with design flaws from the beginning. The track deteriorated quickly under heavy use, developing cracks and gaps that could catch the small sleds and send riders flying. The handbrakes were notoriously unreliable, often failing completely and leaving riders with no way to control their speed. Despite these known issues, the park continued to operate the attraction with minimal modifications. George's family was devastated by his death. His parents had to cope not only with the loss of their son, but also with the knowledge that his death resulted from negligence and corner cutting. The park's owner, Gene Mulvihill, was known for his cavalier attitude toward safety regulations, often circumventing them entirely by creating his own insurance company to underwrite the park's liability. In the aftermath of George's death, Action Park made only minor adjustments to the Alpine slide. The ride continued to operate for years afterward, causing countless more injuries before finally being shut down in the late 1990s. Remarkably, no criminal charges were ever filed against the park's management, despite the clear safety violations that led to George's death. George Larson Jr.'s tragic accident marked the beginning of Action Park's dark legacy. Over the years, 5 more people would die at the park, earning it nicknames like Traction Park and Accident Park among locals. The Alpine slide alone would be responsible for thousands of injuries during its operation. Today, George's story serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences when amusement parks prioritize thrills over safety. His death, at just 19 years old, cut short a life full of promise and potential. While Action Park has since closed and reopened under new management with modern safety standards, the memory of George Larson Jr. and his tragic final ride on the Alpine slide remains a haunting chapter in the park's infamous history. A young life needlessly lost to negligence and the pursuit of extreme entertainment. It was August 3, 2016, at a water park in Phoenix, Arizona. By late morning, heat sat heavy over packed walkways. Temperatures passed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Whistles sounded, pumps roared, and safety rules looped, blending into the background as families queued, restless, slick with sunscreen, waiting for slides to clear. Daniel Kress was 38 and worked as a shift supervisor at a warehouse in Glendale. He ran crews, filled in when people called out, and liked being known as dependable. After a doctor warned him about high blood pressure, he lost nearly 40 pounds. The physical change led him to take more physical risks without medical clearance. At home, Daniel was a hands-on dad to 2 young kids and had been married since his early 20s. He liked recording small moments on his phone. Nothing public, just clips sent to family chats. In the months before the incident, coworkers noticed he increasingly joked about still having it and proving he wasn't fragile. It was his day off. By noon, the heat was brutal and the park was packed, with lines spilling across hot concrete and lifeguards shouting to be heard. Daniel pointed to the tallest speed slide, a near vertical body slide built for maximum drop and acceleration. Signs and staff repeatedly warned riders to go feet first. Daniel laughed it off, strapped his phone into a waterproof chest pouch, and ignored another warning about head-first entries increasing speed and risk at the shallow runout. When it was his turn, Daniel didn't sit the way he was told. He leaned forward, tucked his arms in tight, and pushed off head first. A fixed overhead safety camera later confirmed his launch angle, and body position differed from the required posture. The slide's angle forced him to pick up speed almost immediately. Water slammed against his shoulders as the tube narrowed. When he burst out of the exit, his head was the first point of contact. His forehead struck the concrete lip at the end of the slide. His neck violently folded under the force, while the rest of his body continued forward due to momentum. His torso folded, then struck the water's surface flat. People nearby saw his body slide several feet and roll face down. He did not attempt to lift his head or arms. Riders exiting behind him collided with his lower body, rolling him face down in the shallow runout. Screaming started immediately. Lifeguards activated emergency protocols and entered the pool. Daniel was pulled onto the deck within seconds. His body was unresponsive, with no purposeful movement, and his eyes remained open but unfocused. His phone case was cracked across his chest. Lifeguards initiated emergency care while another staff member called 911. Security footage later documented the precise impact point at the slide exit. Paramedics arrived approximately 7 minutes after the call. They immobilized his neck, assessed breathing and pulse, and transferred him onto a stretcher as guests were cleared from the area. No spontaneous breathing or response was observed. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the emergency department, per hospital protocol. The medical examiner determined that Daniel died from a high cervical spine fracture. The impact fractured vertebrae at the base of the skull, disrupting the spinal cord and brainstem, which immediately stopped breathing and heart regulation. The report stated survival was not possible given the injury severity. The death was ruled an accident caused by unsafe riding behavior. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol or drugs. Investigators noted that warning signs were visible and that staff issued verbal instructions multiple times. Afterward, the park installed a physical entry barrier preventing headfirst launches. Daniel's phone was returned to his wife. The final video file ended abruptly just before the exit, cutting off mid-motion. It was May 21, 2018. A large regional amusement park outside Seoul buzzed with the energy of a Friday afternoon as thousands of visitors filled its grounds. Among them was Min-Jun Lee, a 15-year-old high school freshman standing at the bumper car pavilion with 6 classmates. Min-Jun had earned a reputation at his Seoul school for fearlessness. A competitive gymnast since age 7, he specialized in rings and parallel bars, possessing exceptional upper body strength and spatial awareness. His Snapchat showcased handstand videos atop school railings, backflips off playground equipment, and daring parkour attempts through narrow alleyways. Teachers frequently reprimanded him for dangerous stunts, but classmates found his recklessness magnetic. Bumper cars are deceptively simple attractions. Electric vehicles weighing roughly 300 pounds each navigate a conductive power grid under the arena surface, with energized contact plates at speeds reaching 8 miles per hour, controlled by riders using steering wheels and accelerator pedals. The ride operates within a metal-bordered arena, approximately 40 by 50 feet, with rubber bumpers designed to absorb collision impacts. Safety regulations strictly prohibit standing, exiting vehicles during operation, or any physical contact outside the cars. Posted warnings throughout the attraction emphasize remaining seated at all times. That afternoon, Min-Jun entered a bumper car with 2 friends while 3 others occupied nearby vehicles. The ride operator, a part-time college student managing 40 simultaneous riders, activated the 5-minute session at 3:15 in the afternoon. For the first 2 minutes, Min-Jun drove normally, ramming friends and laughing. Then he stood up inside his moving car, gripping the steering column while balancing on the seat. His friends reacted with excitement over the electric buzz and collision sounds. Min-Jun indicated to his friends that he intended to swing between 2 moving cars. Nobody stopped him. No adult noticed. The operator faced away, monitoring the timer and many riders. Min-Jun positioned his car between 2 friend-driven vehicles traveling roughly parallel at 6 miles per hour. He planted 1 foot on each car's edge, releasing his original vehicle and gripping both steering columns. For several seconds, he managed to hold the position, grinning widely as they watched the stunt. His left foot slipped on the smooth metal edge. Both hands lost grip simultaneously. Min-Jun dropped straight down into the small gap between the rubber bumper and the floor. His head struck the hard arena floor with devastating force. The impact was immediately incapacitating. Blood was visible on the arena floor. The operator heard screaming and hit the emergency stop within 4 seconds. All vehicles powered down, but some coasting motion continued before the cars came fully to rest. Min-Jun lay motionless between 2 cars, showing signs of severe head trauma and remaining unresponsive. Park medical staff arrived within minutes, finding no pulse. More paramedics reached the scene 7 minutes later, but resuscitation attempts proved futile. The autopsy revealed catastrophic injuries, Min Jun suffered catastrophic head injuries, including skull fractures and fatal brain trauma. Death occurred within seconds of impact. The medical examiner concluded he lost consciousness immediately. The attraction was shut down pending investigation. A subsequent investigation concluded the death resulted from rider misconduct and violation of posted safety rules. No mechanical failures were identified.